Hello. Welcome along to episode 182. This is Simon Jacobs, and you're looking, well, spectacular. Thanks for coming. We need to talk about Oasis. As you are probably aware, unless you live in a cave, Oasis are reforming and doing some concerts around the place, the country. I'm not quite sure how widespread those concerts are. And tickets went on sale. As I'm speaking to you now, tickets went on sale yesterday. I think the internet crashed in lots of places, and it goes without saying, all the tickets were sold in about 4 seconds for every gig. And straight away there was a second-hand market going into operation, selling the same tickets for £6,000, and you can imagine the furore and the excitement for these historic and fabulous gigs. I'm somewhat mindful of the phrase, if you've got nothing good to say about somebody, then maybe it's a good idea to say nothing. In which case, I'll see you next week. But if we do want to talk about Oasis, then I think we've got to be a bit, we bring a bit of balance to this. I've read a couple of articles that's quite interesting. One article saying, it's so unfair that everyone, hates Oasis. I don't hate Oasis. I've never hated them, and I've never loved them. They just sort of, they sort of exist, don't they? And obviously, back in the day, they were extremely popular. But we just have to be a little bit kind of realistic about the reunion. This is a reunion where these two brothers are not intending to create any new music. There's not going to be a new Oasis album anytime soon, as far as we know. And, you can just imagine that, after 2 or 3 gigs, all the same historical issues come pouring out, which creates all those family barriers between the two of them. They'll probably end up fighting again. Who knows if they'll even get to the end of their tour? One hopes they will and be professional. But what is it that has got them back together, do you think? Maybe the lure of £50 million each has got something to do with that. Call me cynical, but I guess that might help smooth over some of those brotherly differences. So it's hard to look at this in anything other than a very commercial way. This is a commercial decision to exploit some of that, and exploit, I mean that in a nice way. I mean to exploit some of the love and, I guess, nostalgia that there is for Oasis, because it's been a good 15 plus years since they were an item. So look, what I want to do just very briefly is give you very much my opinion, and of course it's my opinion, of the good points and the bad points of Oasis. And maybe it's just worth saying as well that just in terms of placing their legacy, such as it is, they've just marked, I think, their 30th anniversary of releasing the first album, Definitely Maybe. And it's only 20, so that was 30 years ago. Okay, so it's 29 years ago since we had that really ridiculous media frenzy about who was going to get to number one, which Blur won. Remember the whole Blur Oasis thing, which is really something to keep, I think, the newspapers ticking over during a quiet summer. It's 28 years since Oasis played at Nebworth in front of a crowd of about 250,000 people. That's quite big, isn't it? And then they split up about 15 years ago. And in the meantime, it says, I've got a few notes here from an article I was reading. It says, they split up after a series of characteristically volcanic rows between the Gallagher brothers. And since then, there have been marriages, children, divorces, solo projects, etc. So that's where we are. Okay. So I think it's also worth remembering that Oasis emerged in the early 90s from the kind of Manchester scene. So they were seen as emerging around the same in time as well. So the Stone Roses are already really big. Happy Mondays are big. And think about In Spiral Carpets. There's other kinds of bands that were coming from the Manchester area that gave Manchester that moniker of Madchester. It was the rave period, and out of that came this kind of rock band. And positives and negatives. Okay, this is my own view, and I had to sit down with myself and have a little think about what's good and what's bad about this quite polarizing band in this country. The positives. Okay, number one positive for Oasis, I think, stands out an absolute country mile, is Liam's voice. He has got a classic rock star voice, and there aren't that many of those to go around. Now, look, I don't think he's the only one. I mean, not very long ago, we talked about Tom Petty. Now, Tom Petty had emerged a good, how many years? 15 years earlier. Tom Petty had an amazing, snarly rock voice. And obviously, Liam's came with a whole taste of Manchester accent, which was great. So I think his voice was and still is, really good. And I think 2 or 3 of their songs were really good, but not that many. And this is my problem, is I was never that interested in them because for me it always started with the music, and I just found some of the music a bit ploddy. But let's think about it. The 2 or 3 really good songs. Well, Wonderwall, that is a great song, and I think I got a little bit tired of it because for about 10 years after its release, every city centre around the whole of the UK would have a busker singing Wonderwall. It was just the thing that buskers had to play, Wonderwall. If you were a busker and you didn't know Wonderwall, I mean, get off the street. So it was a bit of a kind of cliche earworm. But why? Because it's a great song. I would say Champagne Supernova is really good. A couple of tracks from the first album, Live Forever, but for me that's kind of about it. And you've got to remember that by the third album, which was Be Here Now, which by the way is not a nice album to listen to. It's a kind of big, bloated, self-indulgent affair because of the drugs. So, it kind of went downhill pretty quickly. But I would say, staying with the positives, 2, 3, maybe 4 good songs in their canon, albeit that they all happened in those first 2 albums. And then, as far as I'm concerned, the negatives. Well, they were just very good at very bad behaviour. I mean, they just were confrontational as part of their thing, but they did really kind of throw it around with their kind of bad rock star behaviour, and it did include a good measure of homophobia and just generalised insults hurled around at people in a very sneery way. And I remember just thinking, so for example, they were very sneery about Take That and Robbie Williams, and of course they were about Blur and about everybody else. And you sort of think, well, why? These other artists, they may be very different. I mean, it's hard to really compare Take That with Oasis, except they all came from Manchester area. But what made them think that they were any better than any of those other bands? That always annoyed me at the time. You don't need to do that. For me, I always felt that Oasis were a bit of a nostalgia band. They were a throwback even then. And so in that sense, I don't think they were very influential. I think they were influenced, but didn't really influence a generation. There wasn't a sound that was produced that then, lasted into the next generation. They were a bit of a throwback. And as I say, they got very bloated and very self-indulgent very quickly. So, you've got the 2 albums, the second of which, What's the Story, Morning Glory, did sell millions of copies and is one of the best-selling albums the UK has ever seen. So that remains. But from there on in, it was pretty difficult to love them. And if you look at the tracks, the track lengths on Be Here Now, suddenly the tracks are, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and that's always a bad sign. Let's leave it there. And finally, look, I would just say, if you think about the 90s in its, in its full glory and horror, the good bits and the bad bits of the 90s, Oasis, I would say, were very much overshadowed by their peers. So if you just think about Britpop, whatever that was, the real major stars of Britpop who really moved it forward, I would say, Blur and Pulp, most definitely. And there were a bunch of other bands, Suede and Elastica and all those other types of bands in the 90s, who were probably more interesting really than Oasis. So I would say less remarkable than their peers even at the time. And as they're not thinking of making any new music, we know what the Oasis canon is, and for me it boils down to 2 albums and a few tracks on those 2 albums only. So there it goes. Look, I don't hate them, as I say. I'm not going to judge anybody who wants to go and see any concert. I don't care about that at all. I don't care about what class they are, what colour they are. That's just a view I've got about their contribution overall to the wide canon of pop music. And on that happy note, I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your weekend and week. I'll be I'm going to be away for a week or so. I might find myself making a video somewhere in Brittany, in France, but if not, I'll be back very soon, and we'll just carry on as we left off. And do remember that in less than 2 weeks, on the 13th of September, will be my next single, which is called The Story Ends, another dance classic for you. And if you haven't heard it already, the Goldhawk Foxes single came out on Friday. It's rather marvellous. It's called So Here's to You, and it's available everywhere, so go take a listen. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.